much further detail about those costs, given the sensitivity of this site to small changes, as we've found, as it's gone through the various viability assessments you've had over the past 3 months. But the other factor which will really be critical to viability is the rate of development on this site, sir. We think that it's just the rates of development being put to you are hopelessly over-optimistic and bear no relationship to anything that has been achieved on similar sites elsewhere. So we agree with the basic position is that you can look for something between 25 to 50 units per outlet once the development starts going. There will be a long build-up to that on this site, sir, because clearly for the early years of this development, this will literally be a housing estate sitting in the middle of the countryside without any facilities whatsoever. We think that, sir, that the maximum, I think the units, the production on, the figures put forward by the council, I think they're up to 280 units per annum. The LDP are slightly lower, although they are much higher in the initial phases, around 200, 240, so they are just unachievable on a long-term average. And of course, that's what we're dealing with here. So it's not what you may achieve at the peak of the market. This is what you have to do over the lifetime of the development, which will see ups and downs in the housing market. We say much lower rates should be taken into account, somewhere between, between 100 and 150 per year would seem to be the maximum, given that you are selling in a relatively remote location, which will be competing with sites such as ST7, so which are much better located for the general housing market in York. And so if you took into account reasonable rates which actually look comparable to rates achieved on similar sites elsewhere in the north of England, then this site is almost definitely not viable. We suspect what is going to happen on this site is something which has been raised previously. You may well get, sir, a development started off Elvington Lane of up to 1,000 units, and then development will stop. Unless and until there's a huge increase in land values. And so it may well stop at a point where there are very few facilities. And you'll just have a development which intrudes into, is highly intrusive in the open countryside, which is basically takes 20, 30 years before it actually gets finished, if ever. So that, I think, that's all I want to say at this stage. Thank you for your patience.
Mrs. Hilton.
Thank you. I think it's been described by other speakers, and I just wanted to echo that this is it's a remote rural area, but it happens to be close to York City. It's off the beaten track. It's got dark skies. It's really unknown to the vast majority of the population in York. And people comment on that almost without fail when they do visit the area, that they just had no idea that it existed. And sadly, it's also been called no man's land in a different forum by the council itself. And I think it is the fact that it's largely unknown and hidden which has kept it in its state as with 4 sinks, 3 on Elvington Airfield and 1 at the southern end of the golf course, and the SSSI that have been preserved on it over decades. And it's also the fact that it's unknown that has left it very vulnerable to the sweep of a pen and the attitude that there's hardly anybody living in it, so that'll be fine. But to go back to what has been said earlier about removing hundreds of hectares of food-producing land at this time, can that really be justified under the NPPF criteria? We don't think it can. And I would like to just pick up again on something that I didn't really get an answer to, about the idea of whether or not there is a barrier to the ingress of people and domestic pets onto the SSSI, and how that would be dealt with in the light of the Minster Way and the other bridle ways around it.
I haven't provided an answer yet because I haven't responded, so yeah. Mrs. Hilton shouldn't be concerned. I will deal with it.
Thank you, thank you. I'm glad it's going to be dealt with because it's ambiguous within the plan. Sorry, that's knocked me off my stroke now. Oh, I know, just pick up on the dark skies. I don't agree with Mr. Corsia that the lanes, even if they were allowed to be a cycle pedestrian route, would need to be lit. It would be expected that people cycling and walking in a rural area at night would be supplying their own lighting. Because if they are lit, that will be the end to all of the nocturnal creatures. And I haven't seen anywhere anything written about the nocturnal fauna in the area. The birds, the bats, the deer, the thousands and millions of moths and other insects. They don't seem to be in any of the ecology surveys. So I think that the addition of any lighting would be very damaging to the area. And then that brings us to the grade-separated junction, which obviously will be lit, and it will be brightly lit, and it'll be very high and visible from a long way. And that in itself will utterly change that area southeast of Heslington. Thank you.
Mr. Merritt.
Thank you. I flagged yesterday when we were discussing Site ST7, the Environments Forum's view that it would be better to have a small number of rather larger new settlements than some of the very small settlements that are proposed on the edge of the urban area, so as to ensure sites are large enough to act as largely self-contained communities. In terms of this site, this is a much smaller site than the previous ST15 site, which was nearer the university and the A64 in earlier versions of the plan, which we think would be much better because it can provide the scale that allows a good range of local facilities that will deliver the volume that's necessary to have 7-day-a-week commercial bus services to deliver the size of population to justify GP surgery and all those other issues that we flagged in the phase 2 hearings on the matter on the spatial distribution. And I think the very recent evidence in the ex-CYC document 89, the Woods study of the sustainable transport needs for this site, actually emphasises why the shift of the location of the ST15 allocation is a mistake. As Mr. Corsier flagged, if you look at the table at the end of section 4.5 on page 45 of that document, it shows that basically even the university and the science park are out of walking distance from the site in a 30-minute radius, and that the city centre and other parts of the city are outside the 30-minute cycling radius. It's too far out where it now is. And we think that actually has secondary concerns. This, of course, would be the first major development in many, many decades on this side of the city. And one of the reasons for that is the proximity to the A64. Generally, the council, successive councils in previous versions of the plan going back over all that time have sought to allocate new sites on the northeast of the city, remote from the A64, because of the concern that sites well located relative to the A64 will potentially be used to accommodate housing demand from Leeds and West Yorkshire rather than meeting local housing demand. And therefore we're doubly concerned at the move of this site further out in that it disadvantages the travel time for journeys to the city, to the university and so on, relative to journeys just driving straight out onto the A64 and to Leeds. If you went back to the previous location of ST15, it would certainly put the university and the science park within 30-minute walking distance, and in that sense, reference the representations that and concerns that we've expressed about the need for additional student housing and the limitations of the existing campus, a site much nearer to the university and much nearer to the city, so people could walk or more particularly cycle to a larger proportion of the city, will actually make it much more attractive and likely to be occupied and used to meet local housing demand, as I say, rather than displacement from West Yorkshire. That said, obviously, if the council is unwilling to adhere to that, we would still like to see a larger version of the current proposal for exactly the same reasons, including achieving a sufficient size and scale of development to deliver the secondary school, which we welcome the additional potential allocation, but we would obviously like to ensure that that is guaranteed by having a sufficient secondary school age population. Also welcome, in terms of the information that's provided today in the Statement of Common Ground, the proposed park and ride linkages, particularly the phase 2 potential linkage. Again, if the site was larger, that would, I'd hope to see that could then be a definite requirement rather than just potential. That's absolutely important to gain the sufficiency for, as I say, commercial 7-day-a-week, evenings included, bus services based on the evidence that we provided at the phase 2 hearings on the size of settlements that are required to deliver that. And I'd make the point that in terms of the Wood Sustainable Transport Study, whilst it is generally an excellent document, one of the big holes in it is it actually doesn't examine that particular question of what is a large enough site to deliver commercial high-frequency public transport. So in that sense, I think the evidence we've provided still is the better set of evidence than is in the actual Wood document on that matter. I also would echo Mr. Courcier's comments about the issue about the provision of services on the site. We feel that that is an important issue that actually needs to be properly secured out of the development and in the policy framework on which planning applications will be assessed. We have had previous experience of sites in and around the city where the development briefs, the initial proposals were going to deliver a series of services. Because it was left to the commercial market, a lot of them never happened. And that cannot be allowed to take place in a freestanding settlement like this if it is to have any chance of being self-sustaining. And there also obviously needs to be requirements in terms of relatively early timings for the delivery of those types of services. Finally, coming back to the two issues, coming back to the sustainable transport study, the study makes positive references to a number of principles that have been stated in the bus service improvement plan document that the government has recently supported and funded. However, a lot of those policies are neither in the transport section of this draft local plan, nor in the current local transport plan 3. And we would hope when we come to phase 4 of the inquiry that the council would certainly look to bring forward amendments that will ensure those principles are incorporated in the local plan. The final issue in terms of the proposal, in the Wood document, it very usefully looks at a number of the other garden village studies and references the TCPA guidance. And a core feature of that is in terms of the range of facilities and provision that you would actually expect to see employment as a component, and all the case examples quoted have employment within the site, so that as again, there's a reasonable opportunity to provide some fair degree of it being a relatively self-contained, self-sustaining community. I think that will also be important in this particular site. Clearly, that ought to be specifically allocated, particularly if we move back to the previous ST13 site. But if we are forced to accept the current location, then there needs to be adequate and good positive walking, cycling and bus extensions to the Elvington Business Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Ms. Winter. Sorry, could you pop your microphone on? Thanks.
Sorry. It was just to support some of the points that were raised by Mr. Corsier earlier on in relation to policy SS1 and the location of development. We continue to have concerns in relation to the selection of ST15, and I won't repeat those because they are set out within our representations that have been submitted at various stages of the plan. But really our concerns link to some of the site selection and the Greenbelt methodology documents, and again this was also highlighted by Mr. Corsier. They've been continually amended and updated through the process, and I think this has resulted in some inconsistencies and key points that haven't been highlighted. Again, Mr. Corsier raised these earlier in relation to CYC 59G and SD 103. And I think really it's important that they're taken on board when looking at this site and then linking them back to some of the discussions that we had within the phase 2 sessions earlier on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I can't read your... I still can't do... Yeah, Mr. Morrison. My apologies.
That's absolutely fine, sir. Thank you very much. I'll be brief. In terms of particularly the sustainability aspect of the long-term sustainability aspect of SD15, the Civic Trust are concerned about location and scale. We agree with our colleagues, with Mr. Murrett, that actually on the proposals map, the very first location of SD15, closer to the A64, was, for many reasons, a more sustainable position than its current site being forced away from 64 in terms of being much more dependent upon car transport. That's borne out, we think, by looking at EXCYC 99, where it says, basically puts forward a 7-to-1 ratio in expenditure for infrastructure of a car over active travel and public transport. Surely, in the present circumstances, that cannot be cannot lead towards a good, sustainable settlement. And if Principle 9 is to be believed that actually that's one of the ambitions of the settlement, then that needs to be borne in mind. Also, we do agree that actually a larger settlement closer in would be a more sustainable community, would create a more sustainable community. Current academic research in Wales and in Ireland have shown there is a long-term relationship and ratio between sustainability and scale of population. A recent study in Ireland, looking at 79 settlements, taking 300 attributes, showed that actually a population of around 10,000 meant that you led towards a good chance of long-term sustainability. And I think that's where the idea of the services and the education aspect that's laid out in this proposal being guaranteed to take precedent within the development of the community is absolutely crucial, because otherwise we do run the risk of it becoming a car-dependent dormitory village, which we don't want it to become because of all the aspects people have already mentioned around the need for that within this rural area. So I think they're basically the points I wanted to make, that were quite simply, because otherwise I'll just repeating what the people have already said, and that's just wasting your time, sir. So thank you very much.
It would be, so grateful for that. Mrs. Hilton.
Very quickly, Mr. Merritt reminded me just to pick up on, I think, a typo in the Statement of Common Ground regarding the secondary school potential site, which paragraph 28, I think it should read, it should be at the east side of the ST15 allocation.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I was just asking, because there's been quite a lot of points there, in fairness to the council, for them to reply to. So only 9 minutes earlier than I would take my lunch break in any event, so that will give the council a little bit of time to sort of pull its response together. Yeah, I'm thinking that. Yeah, unless there are any violent objections, I'm suggesting a slightly shorter break than perhaps normal for lunch, and resuming at 1:30. I can't see, anyone going apoplectic with rage. So in which case I will do that. So at 12:51, I adjourn the hearing to resume at 1:30. Thank you.